What's up,
Exactly.
everybody? It's
Back
your
again.
usual three. It's the Chondro Bar Room, and we didn't do an intro. We didn't wait because we were already talking, so we didn't feel it was fair to y'all. But we have the legendary Mr. Greg Maxwell here, and we will do an introduction in a second. But first of all three of us
Yes.
are really excited to have Mr. Maxwell here with us so that we can
For
actually
sure.
talk, from the perspective of the newer generation to one of the OGs and the creator of the book that most of us have. Most of us have this book, and
Yeah.
it was one of the first piece of literature that we could actually get our hands on. So we are
hmm
super excited, Mr. Maxwell. Thank you for coming and hanging out with us tonight.
I appreciate you guys asking me on. I had to. I'm an old guy, so I had to go on to Google and find out what OG stood for.
Nah, that's
It
definitely
stood
most
for
definitely.
original green, right?
Yeah,
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 we go.
exactly, man. Exactly. Original green tree python guy. Short for short.
All
Definitely
right, so
a term of endearment though, especially when I use it. Because for me especially to be able to talk to the forefathers of this and people who laid the groundwork and man, it's an honor. It's an honor, man. Like I told you, I got 1,000 questions for you, and yeah,
I got at least
yeah.
900 answers.
All right, I'll take that. That's enough. That's enough. I won't be greedy.
all right, Chuck, you got anything before we get into it?
Nah, let's not talk about me. Let's talk about Greg.
No, I mean I'm saying that, but you did you want to say anything?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you a lot for coming on. It does mean a lot to us. We're all newer breeders, and to speak with the person whose book I read is it's an honor, and I really want to send my book to you for an autograph if you wouldn't mind.
Oh yeah, I'm always happy to do that. Or you can catch me at Tinley in October.
I
Oh
will be
yeah, I'll
there,
see you at
sir.
Tinley.
Yeah,
I
we
oh
so all
yes,
yeah, all three of us gonna be there.
yes, yep. I would like to buy you a beer.
Deal.
All right, so Kino, I'll let you kick it off because I think that you got like 15 and
Yeah.
I got about a solid 12. So I'll let you go. We'll try to keep it in the topics like whenever you talk about something, if I got something to add on, I'll add on and Chuck
Okay.
you the same. But Kino, we'll let you kick it off, man.
Okay. So let's. What came first, Greg? The cages or the chondros?
Definitely the cages. Yeah.
Okay, so let's
Actually,
jump
I
over. Let's start with that first.
I I started building snake cages when I was a little kid. I've always liked building things. I'm sitting here. You
Okay.
can see the tools behind me in my guitar
Yeah.
repair shop. But I've always liked to build stuff. And when I was growing up in our neighborhood, there were a lot of new houses being built. So I would go around at night and scavenge leftover plywood out of the burn piles and stuff,
Yeah.
and take it home. And all I had was a coping saw. If you know what a coping saw is, it's just a little tiny saw. And I
Wait,
spent hours.
you were cutting plywood with coping saw?
Yeah.
Oh,
Absolutely, yeah.
how many blades did you go through?
Yeah, I don't remember. I'm probably only 9 or 10 years old. That's the only saw I had.
You need a lot of
Um,
teeth
and
for plywood. It's like plastic.
and then I would, when I had the
The
cage
arm
done
is
and I
strong as hell.
needed glass for the front, I would ride my bike to the lumber yard and buy glass for the cages, and then I would ride home with panes of glass under my arm, ride my bike, and it's a wonder I didn't crash and cut my arm off or something. But so yeah,
Yeah.
the cage business definitely came first.
Okay. And then as you got older, get into the cage master thing. How did that go?
Sure.
How you designed your own. Eventually, you ended up selling that.
Right. Yeah. So I started off, like I said, building snake cages when I was a kid. And I had a business for a number of years making custom furniture, had a cabinet shop, and I always had leftover scraps and stuff from cabinet jobs. And it was 1989, I think. A buddy of mine said, "Hey, there's this reptile show in Columbus every month, Columbus, Ohio, where I live. An old friend of mine, Don Hamper, who unfortunately passed away 2 or 3 years ago, but I've known Don since I was about 13 or 14 years old. And he actually started the very first reptile show in the United States, and started it in 1988. So
that's the year I was born.
I was born in '89.
I'm born in '87.
Yeah, so it's been. I'm 1957. So, but
Hey, you still young. You still young.
You still a young.
Yeah, I'm a kid. So went to the reptile show, and I thought, I wonder if I could make some reptile cages and make some side money. So went back home, and that month I put together 3 or 4 different sizes and took it back to the show the next month. And I'll never forget, there was a guy sitting beside me at the show. I don't know who he was. I don't remember his name or anything, but he was like, "Man, you're not going to sell any of those." He goes, "All people in this hobby want is a cracked aquarium with a board on top." And so I thought, well, we'll see. So, man, I sold every cage I brought to that show, and I had people ask me, "Can you come back next month and bring me 6 of this size?" And
damn, you sold out.
Do you do racks, with shoe boxes and stuff? And so, to make a long story short, within 6 months, I completely shut down furniture making and started mass producing reptile cages, and we branched out into incubators and rack systems.
Look at that.
This was several years before the plastic, hit the scene. So all of our stuff was very heavy, really heavy to lift and carry around. But I had a box truck, and the second year, and they called the company Cage Master, and I was doing the Columbus Reptile Show every month, and that was always on a Saturday, and then the day after there was another monthly show in Chicago. So I was doing those 2 shows, and just getting bombarded with orders and filling up the truck. And then in 1992, I think, 1992 or 93, we started doing the national shows. So I started doing Hamburg, Pennsylvania, Pottstown. Then we went down and did the Breeders' Expo, which at the time it's in Daytona now, but originally it was in Orlando. And it was the first business I had that was like a really huge commercial success. And I would go to these reptile shows, and by the end of the show, I had thousands of dollars in cash in my pocket. And I thought, maybe I should buy a whole bunch of green tree pythons.
It's time to go shopping.
Right. Yeah, so I met Trooper Walsh in Orlando in 1993, and bought my first pair of chondros from him the next month in Richmond. And the rest, as they say, was history.
What were those first 2?
Yeah.
Those first 2, and I got to tell this funny story. So I had these names for the chondros, and after a while, the names became more purposeful, and we had a lot of fun with it. After the 2002 presidential election, where it was Al Gore and George Bush, and there was a big controversy down in Florida, and they had these ballots with pieces of paper on the back where they punched them through. They called them in the news Hanging Chads. Yeah. So I had to have a chondro named Hanging Chad.
That's where that name came from. Okay, all right.
Right.
Okay, all right.
Where did you think it came from? Hey, tell me what you thought it came from, Keto.
I was young then, man. I did the political. I didn't put that together.
But when I built my first website, my friend Tom Phillips was a programmer at the time, IT professional, and this was really in the very early stages of digital photography. So most of my early photographs were regular film photographs. And so I would have to get them developed, at the drugstore or whatever, and then scan them in a scanner to digitize them, and then email the digitized images to Tom to put them on my website. And when you digitize a file, you have to give it a name. You have to name the file. And so I just literally made these names up off the top of my head that described the snake. It really wasn't the snake's name. So, I had Aqua Girl was the name of one of the files, and Blue Diamond, was another one. And all of a sudden, when my website came out and I started getting ready to produce Offspring, I had people emailing me and saying, "Yeah, I want to get on Blue Diamond's mailing list." And it's like,
get out of here.
Wow, So, but yeah, the first two animals that I brought home from Trooper was Aqua Girl, which is actually a sibling to the computer chondro, the first Calico chondro. His sister bought her, and I honestly don't remember what the other one was. It was a male.
Okay. Was that Pygar?
Might have been Pygar. Yeah.
Okay.
Which, by the way, that name came from the old movie Barbarella, starring Jane Fonda. And there's a character in that movie named Pygar. And
Really?
Phil Black, another friend of mine, he wrote the foreword for my second book. And some of us were sitting around at his house one night watching this movie. That's a really dumb movie. It's like one of those old, dumb sci-fi movies.
And I like those movies.
I do too. And so Jane Fonda says to this Pygar character, "Pygar, come." And like this little slave, he starts following her around. And I'm like, man, I like that name. I got to use that for a snake. So that's where that name came from. But yeah, those were the first two. And I drove those home in my Cage Master box truck in a styrofoam box sitting on the front seat in a blizzard on the Pennsylvania Turnpike. I was in whiteout conditions and thinking, man, these snakes are going to die before I even get them home. But we made it.
So I got a question.
Damn.
I got a question from early on that I wrote down here. So at that period in time when you first got your first pair, what were the most common localities to be seen that people were getting a hold of? Was it still like it is today, where it's mostly Beox, or was it different localities at that time that were the most common localities to get a hold of? I was mentored in green tree python keeping by Trooper Walsh, and shout out to Trooper if he's watching. And shout out to Trooper Walsh.
Shout out to you, Trooper.
Yeah. He was responsible for introducing me to green tree pythons and gave me a lot of good help and advice during those early years. And I bought a ton of animals off of him. So he joked at one time that I helped put his kids through college, and I literally did. But when you learn from a mentor, you adopt their attitudes and perspectives about things until you get more on your own, and then maybe you develop some of your own philosophies and stuff. And Trooper and his partner Eugene Bissett were not very positive about locality animals. And I think one of the reasons for that is at the time, there were a lot of people importing wild chondros that were in very poor health. They would arrive, half dead, and they were being marketed as locality animals, basically to help sell them.
Misrepresented.
And maybe not necessarily misrepresented intentionally, but certainly there wasn't any proof or documentation. And we have to remember, as I go into some detail in my book, a locality animal, whether it's a chondro or a gray banded king snake or anything, Locality means where was that animal found? Where was it collected? Not necessarily what it looks like, but where did it come from?
True.
And some people have the ability, like the gray banded king snake people in southwestern United States, they have the luxury of going out and actually collecting their locality animals. So they can say, yeah, this snake came from, they can give you the geo coordinates from exactly where they found it. It's extremely rare in the green tree python world for us to have that kind of luxury. We have to take importers' words for things, and international breeders, and in other countries that may or may not have good documentation. So that's kind of a long answer, but we weren't really working with locality animals back in those days with Trooper and I. We were working with what we would call today designer animals. Trooper
Okay.
started out with whatever chondros he could get. I think most of them were coming from the Port Moresby area of Papua New Guinea, and he did his best to keep them alive and get them to breed. And kudos to him. He's the first private citizen, to successfully breed green tree pythons in captivity in the United States.
Those
So we didn't really, yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I apologize.
We didn't really focus on locality.
Okay.
I suspect there were a lot of Biak animals in those early importations, just because from what I've learned over the years, the Biaks are very numerous in their home range and easy to collect. And when we look at head shape and tail length and shape and everything, I think we could see a lot of Biak influences in some of those early animals. But we were not setting up breeding colonies based on locality.
True. But the animals that you said that he was getting that were supposedly PNG animals. Can you explain how those
Probably.
animals look if you got to see them? The Papua New Guinea animals, the Port Moresby ones you're talking about.
Yeah, they really didn't have a single, appearance that you could describe where you could say, "Oh, yeah, that's one of those." There was a mixture of uh, mostly green animals, but some of them had unusual amount of yellow on them. Others had an unusual amount of blue on them. Some were solid green. Some of them had melanistic speckling or patterning. If you look at a lot of those old photographs, and I think if you go to Trooper's Facebook page, he's got some photo albums that include pictures of some of those old animals. I think I have some of them in my book. I think there's a photograph of his very first female laying eggs, and that's a pretty good representation of what a lot of those animals look like. And when I met
How
him,
were they in size wise?
I don't
Because
really
I
know
asked this
that
because
because
a lot of the imports that we see coming in today are on a smaller side. But we hear
yeah,
stories. Hear a lot of stories about how the animals that you guys were first getting your hands on, and a lot of the animals that started the lines that we see today, they had more size to them. You guys had like some of the bigger condos, I guess I would say.
yeah. Well, by the time I had met Trooper, he'd been actively breeding for a number of years. So
Okay.
I never really saw any of those original import animals in person or had them in my hands. So I can't really
Okay.
say what size they were. Um, but when I first met Trooper in '93, he invited me. At the time, he was an employee at the National Zoo in Washington, D.C. He was a keeper in the reptile house. Yeah, so those were the first chondros that I saw, other than stuff that was at reptile shows. And he definitely had some really big animals behind the scenes at the zoo.
Go see your brother.
So what was your so bringing these back now? You started with those are your first three controls you got from Trooper.
Right.
how long did it take you to breed? And what was your first pairing? The first pairing that you did? Did you breed Pygar first, or was it the computer chondro to Aqua Girl first?
And I got another question to follow right after that.
Yeah, that came through kind of garbled for me. Could you repeat it, please?
Okay, so you got the three animals from Trooper. Those are your first chondros.
Right.
And you
Yes, bro.
decide some along the way you decide to breed them.
Right.
Who did you breed first? Did you breed a computer chondro to Aqua Girl first, or
I
did you
believe
breed
that was my first
Pygar
pairing.
first?
Yeah.
That was the first one.
I
Okay.
believe computer chondro to his sister. That was my first pairing, and
Hmm.
that resulted in a large clutch of infertile eggs
Mm.
that rotted. I was using maternal incubation for that clutch, and so it's really hard to see the progress of the eggs with the female completely wrapped around them. And
Okay.
I don't remember how far into incubation, but fairly advanced into the incubation period. I noticed there was an odor coming from the nest box, and so I sort of pried her away to have a look, and my heart fell because I saw a big pile of brown and yellow
Right.
rotten eggs.
Man, that had to be a
So
tough
I don't
feeling,
really
man.
know if they were fertile to begin with and went bad, or they were infertile to begin with. I don't really know, but that was in 1996,
Okay.
and
And
then
that was the
the
first time you
following
paired
year I
them?
produced. That was the first pairings I did. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and then the following year in 1997, I produced my first clutch from a female named Joan Collins,
Okay. And
I gotta
and
was that Pygar to Joan Collins?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah,
All
I
right.
think
I,
so.
I got a question, Mr. Maxwell. So in the book, it talks about thousand
Sure.
grand
And
females.
I appreciate the respect, but you can call me Greg.
Okay, Greg. In the book, it talks about thousand grand females. How often were you guys seeing thousand grand females at that time? Because we don't see them as often now.
Yeah. Um, Usually 3 to 4 years of age. Um, they were approaching that weight. I hear nowadays the standard wait time is 5 years.
Hmm.
I think back then we were breeding 4-year-old females for the first time, mostly.
Okay.
And to be honest, we were probably overfeeding them. Um, I think, people ask me all the time, what would you do different? I think one of the things I would probably do differently is maybe feed the animals smaller meals and maybe a little less often.
Okay.
I think back in those days, I think we tended to produce some obese animals. And I think that maybe contributes to lethargy, lack of breeding response,
Okay.
prolapse. I'm not saying it does every time, and I'm not saying I would 100% change things, but I think that would be something I would look at because
So
we
I,
were
I
trying to get females up to breeding size as quickly as possible.
Okay.
So um,
Yeah, because back then the whole thing was chondros. If you were given to live with 3 years, you was like God back
yeah.
then. Go
So
ahead, Trey.
I had a question about like so I talked to a older breeder who's still doing it. He's been doing it since the '90s, and one of his feeding regimens was to give an animal
I'm
um,
gonna I'm gonna interrupt
a
you for a
small
second.
rat.
Um, I don't know if the problem's on my end, but a lot of your questions are coming through garbled to me, like robotic and broken up.
Is it just specifically Travis, or can you hear me really well?
Uh, it's been going on now off and on for 3 or 4 minutes.
How's it
Uh,
sound, everybody out there?
Yeah, how's that
you,
sound? You hear me?
Keno and Travis and Greg, you all sound good to me. Do I sound good to you, Greg, or no? It
I
might
can
be on
hear
his
you
end. Okay.
now. I
Okay,
can't.
you can't hear him now.
Can you guys hear me, Trav?
Yeah.
I can hear
Greg sound good to me.
You sound
Yeah.
good.
Do you maybe want to have him back out and come right back in? See if we reset
Yeah.
the connection.
Do you want to try to back out? I will take you out, and then you just hit the link again, and I'll bring you back in.
Yeah,
How's
you can
that
come
sound?
right back in.
He's
You want me to leave and come back in?
Yeah,
Yes.
just
Okay.
back out and then hit the link again, and I'll bring you back in. Hopefully that fixes it.
Ooh, it was getting hot and heavy.
Yeah, well,
Sweating a little bit. I got the
YouTube-
sheen going off on the
Hey,
forehead.
YouTube try to hate on us. You know what I'm saying? Let me mess
You
with the
always
comments
got-
real quick.
you always got the sheen going on that little
What's up? Who
dome.
in
You
the
got.
All right, Bill. I see Bill. Adam Salad up in. Shout out to Adam Salad, man. Adam Salad came through with them shakers for a player.
Yeah, tossed
What's up,
salad and
Diddy?
scrambled eggs.
GCG. We appreciate the love. We really do, man.
Hey, Greg,
What's
can you
up,
hear
Melody?
it?
See you.
How's the audio?
Tradesman,
Yeah, it's good now.
Bill,
Good,
Chuck, everybody.
Okay.
Very good.
All right, there we go.
So my question was, I was talking to an older guy. He told me that he fed a snake a small rat once a week, and he said that's how the older guys used to do it. That sounds like prolapse city to me, but I want to hear your opinion on it.
Yeah, I would typically feed about once every 7 to 10 days a small rat for adults.
This is for males and females?
Yes.
Okay.
Obviously, I would taper the size of the meal to the size of the snake, so
Right.
adult females would get a little bit bigger meal than a male would. But
what was the typical clutch size that you were seeing? Was there any? Did it vary very much, or was there a consistent number?
yeah, it always seemed to either be right around 8 or 9, or around 17 to 18. It's like very few in between. And that always made me wonder if maybe it was a difference between one ovary firing or both ovaries firing, because the bigger clutches were almost always double the smaller ones.
Okay.
So I got a question for you about cycling.
Damn, that's deep. I never thought about that. How, it could be only one ovary.
It just seemed odd that the bigger clutches were almost always, double the size of the smaller ones. I didn't get very many that were like 12 or 14. It was always, 7, 8, 9, or 16, 17, 18.
So I got a question about cycling. And it says that you drop temperature as low as 67 degrees. How often did you drop to that temperature? Was that often?
Yeah, every night. Typically, what I would do is
the
keep
basement windows open.
Yeah, my whole basement was converted to my chondro facility, and when I got ready to start cycling animals, which is typically in the fall, October.
You in the Midwest too? You in Ohio?
Right, in Ohio, right. I would start turning off the heat to the cages at night. Typically, the rest of the year, I would provide heat 24/7. But in preparation for cycling, I would start turning the heat off at night and just use a timer. And I would do that for a week or two. And then I would start dropping the temperature in the basement by cracking a little window open. And, my goal was to drop it into the low 60s or so, low to mid 60s. And I would continue that regimen throughout the breeding season and would restore 24-hour heat to females after they ovulated.
Okay. The mayor has a quick question for you.
All right.
He says, what's the most babies Greg produced in a year?
Oh, gosh, I would have to go back and look through some of my old records, but I think I came close to 100 a couple of seasons.
A couple of seasons. Wow.
That makes me want to cry.
How many adults were you working with at any one time?
Yeah.
Well, egg hatching season usually started in February or March and went through April or May. It varied a lot. So obviously you start off with one clutch hatching, and then maybe a week or two later you have another clutch hatching, and so you would have the opportunity to get working with one clutch of babies at a time, and usually by the time clutch number 3, clutch number 4 hitting the ground, you've already got hopefully clutch number 1 feeding well for the most part. And the nice thing about baby chondros is once you get them eating, it can take quite a bit of work to get them eating, but once they start, man, it's easy. You just open up the tub, bang, 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 and you can feed a whole rack of babies, in a short time after they're going. But yeah, breeding season definitely keep you busy.
How many adults did you have at your highest point?
I think I was probably up to about 35 or 40 at my max.
Nice.
Okay.
And then I always had 10 or 12 yearlings, holdbacks that I was raising up from the previous year.
And what were you doing for rodents to keep them all fed?
I bred my own rats and mice.
So I got a question about hatching. It looks like you incubated in substrate directly, and I want to know what was the difference between that and artificial incubation and maternal incubation.
Sure. Well, chondro incubation, I think, has come a long way. When I first started out, it was considered very, very difficult to successfully hatch green tree python eggs. Most people, I think, including Trooper, started off with maternal incubation because, hey, if the female knows how to do it, just, let her do it. But then he began to experiment with some different types of artificial incubation. Some other people that I knew were also experimenting with it. And so there are some distinct advantages to using artificial incubation. Gets the females recovered from egg laying much quicker. And you can know how many eggs you have, how fertile they are right from the start, that kind of stuff. So I switched from maternal incubation to substrate incubation, and then quickly switched from that to what we called the no substrate method, which really it wasn't a no substrate method. It was a water substrate, but the eggs obviously were not in direct contact with the water, and that's how I hatched out most of my eggs, was using that no substrate method. Some people in Europe, I think, had pioneered it, and then Trooper experimented with it and had some success, and he introduced me to his method when I was still using maternal and substrate. I used vermiculite for substrate when I was doing that, and so I tried the no substrate method, and I really liked it. So that's the one I ended up sticking with long term, and what I used mostly.
Okay. And your incubation jars, because I'm still astounded with that, because we don't do that at all, but it worked well for you, and how you would gas the lid. Could you talk about that for a little bit?
Yeah. Can you repeat the first part of that again, please?
Your incubation jars, like the jars that you put them in.
Yeah, that was a Trooper and Eugene. That was a Trooper and Eugene Bissett technique. I have a picture of it in my book just to document, some of the methods that were used. I tried that method a couple of times and found it pretty difficult to monitor the humidity and keep it correct. And it's like anything. If you stick with it and work the bugs out, you can get any method, pretty much to work. But I found that method to be pretty difficult. It would get overly humid really easy. So I didn't stick with that one long term.
Getting back to the computer Chondro and Aqua Girl pairing. So you said
Yeah.
the first one was all infertile. Was it the second time around that you hit Calico Junior?
Yes.
Okay. I guess let's get into. I want to get into him. Was he when you bred that? So that was the second parent. That was the repeat parent, right?
Right.
First, do you think them being direct siblings and the inbreeding had something to do with the first parent being infertile?
It's possible. I
Okay.
certainly believe that sibling to sibling inbreeding is best avoided if at all possible.
Okay.
I really wanted to try to prove out whether that calico appearance was heritable or not. So I figured sibling to sibling breeding, since I didn't have access to the parents,
True.
I just had the sibling, was my best shot at that. So that's why I did it.
So
But
when Calico Junior popped out, did he have any siblings look like him, or was he just from day one? You was like, all right, I know that's the one.
he was unique. That was the first green tree python baby that I ever saw in my own collection or anybody else's that was a solid dark patternless baby. Maybe there were some other people that had some before me, but I never saw any. And I believe there were 5 in that clutch, if my memory is correct. It wasn't a large clutch.
Okay.
And the other 4 were all maroon babies, but more or less typical maroon. And then he came out, that almost that solid, black. And I thought, oh yeah, I got to hang on to that one and see what happens. And then when he started to go through the color change, he just started to change one scale at a time, little pinpoints of color, and it took place over a really long period of time, several months. And he ended up looking like he looked, and of course I was hoping he was going to stay that way, and he did.
That's incredible, man. So so at what age did he develop that calico neck, the weird neck that they all know?
Yeah. Well, he started the color change, right around 8 to 10 months, typical, that they usually do.
Okay.
And like I said, it was a slow change. It took place over, again, my memory is not what it once was, but it was probably at least 3 or 4 months before the majority of his change took place. And he developed that neck pattern along with the rest of the colors on his body.
And when did you get Lemon Girl? What was that parent from, and when did you get her?
Gosh, I bought so many chondros during those first few years from Trooper,
Okay.
and I also bought a handful from Eugene. I don't specifically remember the story of when I got her. I would either buy chondros at every reptile show that I went to, or more often than not, I would, I was doing a lot of shows on the East Coast, Staten Island, Richmond, the Pennsylvania shows, the Florida shows, and I would make it a point to swing by Trooper's basement every time I was on the East Coast, and I'd, buy 3 or 4 more. So I put together a fairly large group of animals in a relatively short period of time, and I'm sure Lemon Girl was one of those.
Okay.
When
I
did
asked because everybody know you for the blue, but if they pay close attention, the outline of that book was based on the design of yellows.
A lot of it, yeah.
What made you go so hard breeding Pygar?
Well, for a while, the first
Because
couple of seasons, he was
is in a lot of lineages.
yeah, he was. First of all, he was a good breeder.
Okay.
Not every male is a good breeder. I could count on him. I used to joke that he would have bred a hemp rope if I'd have put it in with him. But he was a good breeder, and for the first couple of seasons, he was the first mature male that I had till some of my other animals got older.
Okay.
So he shows up in a lot of lineages, yeah. And the first handful of animals that I got from Trooper were all fairly closely related. If I go back through all those old pedigrees from Trooper, there's a lot of commonality in the animals in this pedigree.
Wow.
When at what point did you decide that you were going to do it full time as a job?
Well, I had quit making furniture and cabinets to go full time into the cage business, and that was a difficult business. I think if I had done just manufacturing and let someone else distribute, it would have been a much more sustainable business. But I was doing both, and at the end of 5 or 6 years of that, I was just super burnt out from all the heavy lifting and the traveling and doing all the reptile shows. So at the end of 1996, I sold the cage business, and I thought, well, what am I going to do now? And I knew that there was some good money that could be made with chondro breeding as long as you could produce the animals, because they were steadily increasing in price. When I bought my first babies, I think they averaged about $500 or $600 a piece. And then, when Trooper started producing a lot of maroon babies, because he selectively bred to produce maroon babies, because he liked them, and so did I when I started producing them. So when he started regularly producing bloodlines that were throwing all maroon offspring, the prices went up to $700 to $900, and then to $1,200. And so I recognized there's a viable income to be made here as long as I could produce enough offspring. And so I decided at that time, why not give it a go. And there was some crossover. Even after I sold the cage business, I still continued to make some cages for local people. I wasn't hauling them around the country to reptile shows anymore, but I made some for local people, and did some other cabinet work to fill in and stuff. But it was in 1997 that I decided to go full time into green tree pythons, and I produced one clutch that year, and then in 1998 I produced one clutch, and then in 1999 I produced 6. And I also released my website in 1996, or I'm sorry, 1999. I think it was 99, maybe it was 98. Yeah, findgtps.com. And so, when I produced 6 clutches in 1999 that I really started to, get some cash flow and get some stability, and I could see that it was actually going to work.
Wow.
That's awesome. And how long did you sustain that for until you hung it up?
2009 was when I sold the green tree python business.
Okay.
So I think it was like 12 years.
You have any form of advice for somebody that would look to do it as a business model in like current day? Anything that you would say good or bad?
Yes. Go to law school.
Yes, that was yes. Mr. Maxwell talked talked about it in his
Maxwell,
book where
hey Greg,
he
tell him
definitely
again,
said
sir. Tell him
if you do
again.
this, he said if you do this for financial gain, you will be disappointed.
Would you say that again, son?
Did you
Well,
read the book, Chuck? Did you read the
What that
book?
legend say? For real.
I did.
I think if you
What
get
that
into
man say?
any type of reptile breeding just for the money, I don't think that's a good model because
Mm, mm.
even breeding ball
Talk to him,
pythons,
OG.
uh, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work and a lot of patience. There's going to be big
Mm,
disappointments, and you have to have a passion for the animals,
mm.
and you have to
Preach.
enjoy
Preach.
running a
Preach.
business. Um, and so I had a few people over the years that I could just tell they were getting into it just for the money,
Mm,
and sure enough, those people never lasted because it's
mm,
too challenging and there are too many disappointments to sustain you if all you're after is just income. Now, I don't have any problem at all with having a profitable business and making money, as long as the animals are well maintained and humanely taken care of. I'm
mm.
not opposed to that, but I'm just saying I
Preach.
don't think it's a healthy model because you'll get frustrated and disappointed.
Right. Yeah, I retired in
You have
12
to
years. So
first,
this is my goal is
yeah.
to, set this up and have doing something I love to do in retirement as just supplemental to my pension, and I'm enjoying it
That's
now.
what
I
I'm
think
doing
it's
with
great.
ball pythons. Yeah, I'm doing ball pythons for retirement income. My wife is a registered nurse. She retires next summer. And
Nice.
honestly, I really don't want to work on guitars the rest of my life. Believe it or not, that's a pretty physically demanding occupation. Standing
Get
behind a bench all
compensated.
day. A lot of times I'm wearing magnification glasses and bending over. And man, by the end of the day, my knees hurt, my back hurts, my shoulders hurt. And I really wanted to get back into doing something with reptiles again after taking a dozen years off.
Mm.
So I'm doing ball pythons for the same reason.
Yeah,
Um,
it's fun. It's fun
but
money because
I
you don't got to rely on it.
exactly
It's just fun money.
exactly.
Yeah, that's awesome though. And you got I know you got a fair amount of ball pythons and a
Yeah,
freeway trait.
doing some freeway stuff. Got a pretty good group of pies, um, and then just a few things that are just kind of a multi-gene uh, kind of thing. So
That's cool though. It's fun to work with something so cool, and then go on vacation or something like that if you have a successful year.
Mm.
yeah, yeah.
Well, yeah. Getting back to the green tree python
It's a
eggs,
lot
though,
of
can you
work for a single
explain
vacation.
exactly, Andy.
It's a
Explain
lot of work
the
for a vacation.
explain the 2 week, 3 week, 2 week thing, where you had the eggs at 85, 87, then 85 for the last two.
Okay, so there
And
was
why
a
did you
guy.
go ahead, my fault.
Yeah, sure. Um, when Trooper first started to produce green tree pythons in captivity, his first 2 or 3 years, um, he teamed up with a guy named Dr. Van Meerop, and Van Meerop was doing some research into something happened to do with thermoregulation of python eggs. I don't really remember all the details, but
Okay.
um, he and Trooper, along with Eugene Bassett, set up some equipment to very accurately monitor the egg temperatures of green tree python females incubating their eggs. And what they discovered is that the female will deposit the eggs, form them up into the typical beehive coil to where the eggs are completely suspended inside the coils of the female. They're not touching the substrate inside the nest box. And she will then slowly raise the temperature of the eggs during that first week until they reach, and I always used to work in Celsius. because that's what they did. And so I just used their numbers. But I think it was 30 to 30.5 for the first week. And then she would raise them up to, I believe it was 31.5. These numbers are in my book. For the middle period, and then she would allow the clutch to lower in temperature during that final 7 to 10 days. What's that? It's too small for me to see.
I'm trying to do the calculations while you're talking. So 30.5 Celsius translates to 86.9 degrees Fahrenheit.
Okay.
And then 31.5 Celsius is 88.7 degrees Fahrenheit. So I guess it would start out at 86.9 and then top out 88.7, which are right in between what everyone's incubating currently.
Right. And then she would cool the eggs during that final 7 to 10 days. And interestingly, at that point, the eggs will also begin to generate some of their own heat during that last period of incubation. Mm-hmm. Which maybe was why the female would allow them to cool slightly. So when Trooper began to experiment with artificial incubation, he emulated the egg surface temperatures that they had learned about from monitoring the females during the Van Meerop experiments. And, Trooper and I kind of had, a saying, mother knows best. Mm-hmm. And I realize some people use one temperature all the way through and have success with it. And, hey, whatever works. I don't have any criticism for that. But in my own setup, I was like, if this is what the female does, there must be a reason. So that's what I'm going to do. So I copied that pattern, and that's the regimen that I use.
So do we want to stay on breeding? You got any more breeding questions?
No, I guess not.
I got a question that's kind of away from breeding.
I do though.
No, go ahead, and I'll go after you.
Well, I know toward the end, you start outcrossing more. At the beginning, I know you was doing a lot of designer. What fueled you starting outcrossing more?
Well, we saw so many reproductive issues and health issues, and I didn't know for sure if those were related to inbreeding, but I wanted to start to outcross more just to try to avoid inbreeding depression, which was possibly contributing to infertility, prolapse, a condition we saw in certain babies we nicknamed cigar back, where the babies would almost like bend backwards and their rib cages would flare out, and then it would become a permanent deformity. And we certainly didn't. None of these things were, I would say, common, but they happened often enough that we were like, okay, at least myself.
I was just going to ask that. How often was you seeing it to the point where you was like, we really should start outcrossing? How often was it?
How often did I see health issues like that?
Yeah. Whether it be multiple prolapses from a clutch or the cigar backs or maybe deformed face, things of that nature.
Right. I didn't see prolapse in my collection very often. Okay. I know people talk a lot about babies prolapsing. I had very few babies prolapse. My prolapse issues occurred more often with adults. And even with them, it wasn't common. Obviously it happens, but not very often in babies. The cigar back thing, it wasn't chronic. It would pop up, in a clutch every now and then, and it would always be, just like one baby. And I just got to a point where I was very, very careful about how I handled and manipulated babies to try to avoid the problem. And it seemed like if I could get them to a certain size and age, then I never saw the problem. It always happened when they were real little. I don't know if it was a lack of calcium in the food or what caused it, but that would pop up every now and then. Probably the biggest health issue that I had, more than the other stuff, was respiratory issues. And again, it wasn't chronic. It wasn't something where I'm like, man, I'm doing something wrong here. But it was enough of a problem that it was an irritant. Maybe in a large collection like mine, I'd have 1 or 2 animals a year that would come down with it for seemingly no reason. You would think if you're going to have respiratory issues, it would be when you're dropping temperatures at night.
Yeah, during breeding season.
That's almost, I would almost never see that. It would just happen randomly, in the summer or, just whenever. I'd be in the room, cleaning or whatever, and all of a sudden, I'd hear from some part of the room, ah, and I'm like, oh man, where'd that come from? You start going through tubs and looking, and eventually, you'd hear it again, and you'd narrow it down, and then you'd be able to find the animal. And a lot of times they would perch with their head elevated, or they would make swallowing motions. I never really had them to where they were like super ill, where they were like blowing bubbles or foaming at the mouth. Mostly I would hear them cough. And there was a double antibiotic regimen that we used to use. It's been too many years now. I don't remember the name. I think amikacin was the name of one of the drugs, and I think Fortaz was the name of the other. And one of those could be really hard on the kidneys, so we would also inject lactated ringers underneath the skin of the animal during the injections to provide extra hydration.
What was that again?
The information's in one of the appendices in my book, but I think it was Fortaz and amikacin.
No, you said.
And then we would use
lactated
ringers.
Okay.
It's basically just like saline solution.
Yeah.
We just inject it underneath the skin, and it would form a big bubble in the snake under the skin. But then, like within a few hours, it would totally absorb. And the idea was just to provide extra hydration for the kidneys, so that the medication wouldn't be overly harmful to the kidneys. And I remember that working fairly well. I only remember 1 or 2 losses from animals from respiratory infection. Unfortunately, one of them was a male that I had from a guy on breeding loan. And, it can happen to any animal, but you never want to have somebody else's animal in your collection on breeding loan and then have it die and have to call and say, hey, guess what,
that had to be a rough conversation to have.
Yeah, it's that never goes well.
Yeah.
So Bill made it
I didn't do very many breeding loans just because of that kind of stuff.
So Bill made an interesting comment. He said Nido before we could test it. Did you have any inkling that Nido virus was a thing? And it may not have been in your collection, but at that time, were you hearing things that may have sparked a conversation that there may be something floating around in other people's collections?
No, that really wasn't a topic for discussion back, when I was actively breeding. It might come up from time to time, as a, just kind of an off the cuff discussion with guys sitting around. Hey, do you think there's any kind of stuff floating around? But there was never anything specific that I knew of, and I don't remember there being any tests available.
Yeah.
The thing I remember was something that was going around in boa constrictors, inclusion body disease, I think it was called. That's the only thing I remember specific to a species that was known at the time.
Okay.
Is that still around?
I know he asked that because I know back in the day on the forums and the MVF forums especially, it seemed like a lot of times that respiratory infection was like the death notes for a lot of green trees, especially coming in and out of breeding season.
Yeah.
And, I know you said you didn't lose a lot, but I know there was a people that lost a whole lot. I'm talking like 2004, 2005. You know, it was 06
Yeah,
before the super explosion of social media. Um,
right.
yeah, and I know that looking back now, it's like they describe what you described, the heavy breathing and the and all
Yeah.
that, and yeah.
So I got a question that's away from that. So in your
So,
book, at in the beginning, green tree pythons were broken into four types: Biak, Aru, Mainland, Sarong, and Merauke. So
mhm.
now we have broken them into several more localities. And at the time,
Right.
in your heyday, did you see certain differences in like one sarong that was prevalent in a few? Where you say, there might be a group of these sarongs that are different, or a group of Biocs or Ruse. Did you see any of that at that point in time?
Not really. The locality group that was really kind of up and coming when I was actively involved was the mountain localities. Um,
Cyclop
I think
Mountain,
Yeah,
I think
or
RFAC is
Minas,
one of them.
RFAC
artifacts.
too.
Waminas, right? And there was a group of people that were very enthusiastic about working with those highland forms, as they call them, or mountain forms. And to be quite honest, because of my background with Trooper and the whole locality thing, I was kind of skeptical about it, just because so many people had tried to use locality over the years with unsubstantiated animals to try to boost sales. But I have seen some of that stuff now that does, obviously there's some traits and things that are uh, you can see that make those animals uh, distinct or unique. So I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, now that we got more knowledge, you can tell, but I can understand how back then you looking at people like, man, this dude trying to sell me this fake ass story. He got off this tree down south somewhere.
I think you are. Excuse me. I think you are correct though with the RFAC mountain stuff. Like there's talking to Patrick Holmes and then seeing videos online, stuff like that. I think there was a small group of animals that came in that were very specific. We were collected in the same area, but I think that they're just really poultry animals or manicory animals, and there are yellow neonates and stuff like that. Everyone says that they are only red neonates, but talking to Pat and seeing other videos and stuff like that, I think that you're right, Greg. That they kind of just threw that flair on there to get sales and stuff.
Yeah, it happens, but I think it's cool that people are trying to work with, if not legitimate locality, at least locality types.
Mm-hmm.
Um, again, to repeat myself, a locality animal means that you know exactly where it was collected, and that information
True.
is not easy to come by.
True.
But we certainly can have locality types. I mean, you see a
Types.
classic Aru, it doesn't look like any other chondro. Even though you can't necessarily document where it was collected, you can look at it and say, yeah, that's got all the classic Aru traits. Same with Biak traits.
True.
And interestingly, those are two island forms. So just because of the fact that they're isolated from the mainland, they tend to develop more specific
Distinguishable
traits,
traits.
distinguishable traits that are associated with those populations. Yeah. And certainly, elevation would be another factor that would, potentially limit a population to a geographic area.
Elevation for sure.
Yeah. You got anything else for localities all, What's up?
Localities. No, let's talk about how he uh how he pushed the forward with the internet and
Yeah,
was
the
at the
internet.
forefront of that. Was at the
Yeah,
you
let's
because you
talk
was at the
about that.
forefront of that.
So, what do you want to know specifically?
So
Because
the sites that you administered and go ahead, Trav.
yeah. So I mean, so looking back at it and seeing it, it's kind of remarkable how we see things today. But Did you have any like webmaster type of background, or were you just really enthusiastic about the animals? Where you said, "Hey, I'm gonna learn how to push this on the internet," which was a new frontier to everyone at that point in time.
He was
Oh
he
yeah,
was way
absolutely.
before his time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
way.
Yeah, I mean, I used to by the time I went full time and I had that really good year in 1999, I would spend several hours a day answering email because that was really the only form of electronic communication. This was way before
Yeah,
texting and iPhones and all that.
that was
Um,
that dial-up internet.
Dial. Oh yeah, beyond. Yeah, I remember going. Oh yeah, going through those years, but. So I mentioned my friend Tom Phillips. He was a IT professional. That's what he did for a living. And so he built my first website. And part of it was my enthusiasm just for learning something new and wanting to have control over the appearance of my own website. And
Right.
part of it was I felt a responsibility to learn to do it so that I didn't have to pester Tom every time I wanted to add something or make a change to it. So Tom was very patient with me and spent a lot of time teaching me how to, manipulate a website from the back end. Back in those days, you had to learn some code. These days with WordPress and stuff, a lot of it's just very visual and
Hmm.
intuitive. But so he taught me some coding basics and how to upload photographs and manipulate file sizes and stuff. And so that's how I learned how to do that. And pretty much every website I've ever had, even with the website I have today for my guitars, I've had somebody build the shell for me. And these days, my friend Phil Black is real active in website building as a side business. So but I have somebody build the shell, and then I do all the content. And yeah, back in those days, man, the internet was the wild west. It was crazy.
Yeah. So like getting to that point, when you first did it, like how did you feel like once you start seeing the first forums pop up? Because you also mentioned King Snake in the book as well. So
Hmm.
how did you feel about all that stuff at that point in time?
Trav, get off my paper.
Well,
You on my
I
paper
thought it
now,
was
Trav.
I thought it was an amazing and beneficial resource to have discussion forums. And I think King Snake was one of the very first, if not the first. And
Yep.
at the beginning, king snake was like multi-species, and then as the membership grew and the interest in individual species grew, then it would break off into subforums. So for a while, it was just the python forum, and it was everything from green tree pythons to berms. And then as the green tree python part of the discussion got bigger and bigger, eventually King Snake opened up the green tree python subforum. And as I've gone into it in my book, um, you know I think it's necessary to have some level of moderation anytime you have a discussion forum, especially
Oh, I agree. I
if it
agree, hundred
involves a
percent.
topic that's requires some experience. Um, if there's not some moderation, it just ends up being a free for all and arguing. And the king snake green tree python forum ended up just really having a lot of strife, a lot of negativity. And so Tom Phillips and I decided we were going to launch our own forum, mainly because we just wanted to have a place where we could have some good discussion. And certainly it wasn't a thing where you had to agree 100% with all of our attitudes or opinions, but we wanted it to be respectful,
Right.
and we wanted to have a place where if somebody did come on and put out just some completely incorrect information, we wanted to be able to have a place where we could say, well, in our experience, that's not true. And here's what our experience. says. And on the King Snake forum, we couldn't do that because we weren't moderators. And those forums are largely unmoderated. So, yeah, I mean, back in those days, it was a free for all. Not just the Green Tree Pie, but the Ball Python forum. I remember was just crazy. A lot of arguing and everything. So that's how we launched the Chondro Web forums.
Yeah.
And I think in our second year, we reached 1 million hits, and we were pretty excited about that. And it was a great community, while it lasted. After a few years, we really didn't have the time anymore to moderate it, and so it just kind of.
You was doing 100 babies a year, of course not.
Yeah. Well, and that's actually what led to me writing my first book. We would answer the same, basic set of questions on the forum over and over and over and over. And I certainly didn't mind doing it because I know, when people get into this hobby, it doesn't matter if other people have been doing it 10 years. When you get into it, it's completely new to you and you've got all these questions. And so I didn't mind answering the same questions over and over, but just from a practical perspective, I got to thinking, if I put all this stuff in a book, we wouldn't have to answer the same, basic questions all the time. So I ran into Bob Ashley at a table that he had at the Pottstown, Pennsylvania show. And it said on his business card on the table that he was a publisher. So I ran my idea past him about a Green Tree Python book and told him that I could send him, a table of contents and an introduction when I got back home. And so he said, yeah, go ahead and do that. And I did. And when he got that, he was very enthusiastic about it, gave me the green light. And after I started sending him some of the chapters and some of the photography that I'd done, he was really enthusiastic and decided to make it a full, 300 plus page hardcover book with a dust jacket, which of course thrilled me because it was originally intended just to be a paperback.
I have the dust jacket. No, I got lucky. I got the hardcover.
Yeah. So that's kind of how that whole thing came to pass. And Bob told me that book became profitable for him faster than any title they'd ever published up to that point in time. And it went out of print.
Instantly rich, huh?
Yeah, right. It went out of print pretty quickly. So rather than just reprinting it, Bob asked me a couple of years later if we wanted to do a second edition with, updated information. Because in the Chondro world, 2-3 years, a lot can happen.
Yeah.
So I said, yeah, let's do an updated version of it. And so I jokingly called it the more complete Chondro.
Yeah,
that's the copy I have.
Right.
Yeah, that's part two.
I really like the way you delivered that. Basically, it was almost like I was reading. The entire thing is like a message from you. It's always like, I did this, I did that. I really like how that's in the book. You give an itemized list of like your egg box and stuff like that, where to find it. Like, that's great. It was good. I really enjoyed it.
How'd you?
Good.
Differ,
I'm glad it helped you.
How'd you differ between book number 2 and book number 1? I know you jokingly said it was more complete, but would you?
Well, I think anytime you do something for the first time, you immediately think, man, if I could do this all over again, I'd do this and this and this better.
Yeah.
So I had a couple of years for those ideas to kind of percolate in my head. I think I grew as a writer, so I think the second book is more well written.
It's more like a novel than the first one is like an outline. Yeah, I agree.
Right. And I hired a professional copy editor to edit the second book. The first book was edited by one of Bob Ashley's guys, and he did a good job at it. But there were some typos and just some other things that, I wanted to try to avoid. So my friend Phil Black's mother, she's passed away now, but at the time she was alive and still active. She was a professional copy editor. That's what she did for a living. So I hired her at my own personal expense to edit the book, and it was
You
kind of
say I ain't
funny
dealing with
because
no damn typos no more.
it was kind of funny because Phil told me, he goes, "Now I want you to, prepare yourself that, when she sends it back to you, it's really going to be marked up, because she's going to catch all kind of things, that you didn't notice." Well, of course, by the time you're ready to turn a manuscript into the editor, you've been living with it for a year, and you've probably written and rewritten it, 100 times. And man, when I sent it to her, I'm like, nah, this thing's like almost perfect. Man, when I got it back, there was more red on it than there was black and white. But I think it really made it a much more professional and readable book. So that was a major difference. And then there was just a lot of updated breeding information. 2 more breeding seasons, not only for myself but other people. So I wanted to include all that information in it. So yeah, it just the latest and greatest information I had at the time went into it.
And you have some spectacular pictures. I always like that picture of the little boy standing on the plane.
Yeah, that photograph was provided to me by trying to remember his name. He had an outdoor television show. I give him credit in the book for it, so you can look it up. But yeah, he provided those pictures for me, and that was a really interesting one with the little boy standing on the airplane wing. Yeah.
Yeah, in the jungle. That was an awesome picture. I always loved it. I remember I used to read this book all the time when I was supposed to be studying for my promotion test. And I should have studied for my promotion test. But I used to always look at that picture.
No, man, it got you here talking to Greg.
It did though. It really did though. It made me late on my promotion by a month though. Oh, you want to switch off from the topic from the internet? I got one last question. So when you see
We can just let it rock, whatever,
the Chondro forums now, and MVF on Facebook and all these things,
right?
Do you feel like you have like a piece of like you influenced that at all? Because I think you did.
Like those my sons.
Yeah, like those your sons. Like, do you feel that way at all? Even with us, like Chondro Bar Room, like do you feel some type of reverence for that, as like you influenced any of that?
We're the fruit of your loins, Maxwell.
I don't think of it in terms so much as, hey, look what I did. I think of it more in terms of, wow, it's so cool that the foundation that I and others before me helped lay has continued to grow to the point where now you can find green tree python pictures all over Instagram from many different people, and YouTube channels. And we didn't have YouTube when I was doing this. I would have loved to have had YouTube, but able to actually show people how to feed baby green tree pythons in a video, that would have been awesome. So yeah, I look at it with a real deep sense of satisfaction that I was able to play a part in helping people have success and find enjoyment with it. And I still get people all the time that write me, instant messages or text messages and say, hey, your book was what helped me produce my first clutch. And there's no greater enjoyment than that, and knowing that you help somebody else.
So I got a question about designers.
Sure.
So at the beginning of designers, there were high yellow, canary, high blue, calico, and mite phase. Back when designers were being created, how often were you seeing new people say that they created some different line that was similar to the previous line, and things like King line and like how many lines have you seen over time that were produced that like now seem to be like gone?
Rest in peace, the lemon
not
tree. The lemon tree. That was my favorite one. Rest in peace.
that was a legitimate line. Yeah.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was. But they read the hell out that damn thing.
Is it gone? Are there no more lemon tree animals out there?
It
It's
doesn't
some
seem like
small
there's
percentage. It's people do have percentage lemon trees, but it's like none that's like
there's no
100% because
lemon trees.
yeah.
Okay. Well, the very first designer animals were they weren't really, like specific names. It was just you took some first or second generation captive bred animals and you paired two of them together and you saw what you got. And every once in a while you'd get some really unusual high blue or high yellow animal out of it.
Go.
And over time, those lines and the names associated with them tended to develop. But at first, it really was just kind of, the Magic 8 Ball. Do you guys remember the Magic 8 Ball? That was a toy when I was a kid. You shake the 8 ball and you see what floats to the top. Yeah. And so, yeah, that was kind of how it was. And then as we started to see some consistent traits developing in certain bloodlines, then you got the names, Lemon Tree, High Blue. I think my earbuds are telling me that my batteries are going low. So if I run out,
I'm hearing a little bit of interference from it.
Yeah, if you just want to cut it off and go through the phone,
I just lost my left ear.
If you want to cut it off and go through the phone, let's try that.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, let's try the phone. Yeah. Because way back in the days when they only had email, when they were buying green trees by email, they would just only have like a paragraph of what they had, what the description that a snake was.
Right. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah.
Actually, pretty good. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Fairly decent.
Yeah. So, usually what would happen is somebody would give a nickname to a particular type of appearance, and then it would either stick or it wouldn't. The mite phase was a thing that was started by one of Trooper's young helpers named John Romano.
Okay.
And it just kind of stuck. I picked the name Calico to describe the pattern on the computer chondro, and honestly, I'm not sure it's the most accurate descriptive name. A calico cat has like 3 colors on it, but it just seemed to me like I'd seen some like calico quilts that had all kind of different stuff on them, and just a name that kind of came to me. So that and that one obviously stuck.
You was on my paper over here too, I see, Greg, because I was going to ask you that.
Yeah. But the reason I named that snake the computer chondro was because back in the old days of lower resolution computer monitors, if you put your face like right up close to the monitor, it broke up into little colored pixels. Yeah. And that's how that snake looked. It's like every scale was a different color. And so that's why I nicknamed him that. I guess it probably should have been the computer monitor chondro, but
it's stuck. Like we all know what the computer console looks like.
It's stuck.
Yeah, so it makes sense,
right?
Sure.
But I probably don't remember too many bloodlines or color patterns that didn't stick, because just for that reason they didn't stick, so you don't remember them.
Yeah. So even like the designers like the Canaries and the High Blues, like at that point in time, like how sought after were those designers at that point in time?
Oh, they were highly sought after, but very rarely produced. It was a long time before any of us started to produce consistent blue line animals. Trooper had a pairing. I believe the female's name was Carolina, and male was a famous blue male named Mr. Blue.
Mr. Blue.
Yeah, and unfortunately, Carolina died after just one clutch. But
that clutch was crazy.
Ton of animals in that.
That clutch was crazy.
Turned out blue. That's where I got my male mojo from. And then, you know, I had a couple of animals that consistently would produce high blue offspring, and you know, once you had, you know, that documented bloodline, then yeah, I mean the prices would go up to, even back then, you know, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a baby.
Hey,
and you gotta compare that to inflation. Inflation today at like 20.
Greg, what
25.
What were you doing as far as once you switched over to incubation or artificial incubation? Did you ever breed a female back-to-back years? And if you did, how many years in a row did you breed her?
I would have to go through my old record books. I'm sure I did. I would probably suspect that if I bred a female successfully 2 years in a row, then I would give her a year off.
Okay.
We did
so 2 on, 1 off.
What's that?
So two consecutive, and then give it a whole year off.
Right. And you know, frankly, you know, in a 10-year period, of course, that female's, you know, not breeding for the first time till she's, you know, 3, 4, 5 years old. So by the time she's 10 years old, she's only been active as a breeder for 5 or 6 years. So, you know, we were doing good to get 2 or 3 clutches out of a female before she would die. And females almost always seem to die from some kind of reproductive complication, egg binding. I had one female aqua girl that died from a ruptured oviduct. Opened her up, but just her whole insides was the reproductive organs were shredded. She was just full of like milky liquid. But yeah, 10 to 12 years really seemed to kind of be the max for sexually active females. Now males would live, you know, longer than I think the computer chondro was 16 years old when he died, if memory is correct. And I believe Trooper or somebody in his circle of people had one that lived over 20.
Wow.
Might have been
What was the oldest female that you had?
What's that?
What was the oldest female that you had?
Probably 12 or 14 years, if I had to guess. I'd have to go back and look. And I mostly kept breeding records. You know, I didn't really keep death records, so when a female died, you know, I would just curse my luck and go on to the next one. You know?
Right.
But yeah, I'm sure I had several that were, you know, 12 to 14 years old when they died.
What was the most times that you spread a male around in the breeding season?
I actually never did that. I would dedicate a male to a female, and the only exception would be if the pair just never really did anything, never observed any copulations, just nothing ever happened. Then I would use that male on another female. But once a male began to actively breed a female, he was with her for that breeding season. And part of that reason was because, you know, we had so much issues with fertility, you know, that I didn't want to try to spread a male too thin. Maybe it's possible to do that. I don't know, but I never tried it.
I mean, people do it.
I've only heard of one case of that was suspected.
People are having success with it. I think Bill having success with it, but I just like to get the just ask that, you know, get a lot of different breeders, especially the OG's perspective on that.
Yeah. One thing I never would do is I didn't want to use multiple males with one female. And the reason for that is if she successfully reproduced, I wanted to be able to know on that pedigree who the sire was.
Yeah.
You didn't want to have to take her to the Maury show?
Right.
Rest in peace to Maury. Rest in peace to Maury.
Jerry Springer died. Maury's still alive out here being shit.
Oh, that's right. Hey, they do the same thing. Whatever.
But yeah, that seems to be a thing.
Ah,
So at what point in time back then were you guys noticing that there were multiple paternity for the same clutch?
I didn't try to kill Martin. My bad, y'all.
You mean like using multiple males with a female? I'm not sure what you mean.
Yeah, like so when like a clutch would hatch, what time like at what point in time did you guys notice that hey, these clutches might be fathered by multiple males?
Well, I never did that. I would never use more than one male with a female in a season. So if I had a clutch of fertile eggs, I knew which male was the sire.
Okay.
Okay.
What was the established neo for you?
When was
I'll be
what?
right back.
What's your definition of established neo?
That kind of evolved when I first started breeding, and I've always kind of had a knack for feeding baby chondros. I
Okay.
kind of took to it readily. So I would, first couple of seasons, breeding seasons, I had babies that were, just hammering food after 5 or 6 meals, and so I would ship them out to new customers, and I started having a lot of people tell me, "Man, the snake won't eat for me," and I'm like, "What do you mean? It ate for me every week, no problem." So I gradually started to lengthen the amount of time before I would send them out. And I got to the point where, 12 to 14 meals, I was pretty confident that it was going to continue to feed well for the new owner. So that kind of became my, standard for that. But, the longer the better.
Yeah. Did you ever use like the the way the snake comes out of the tub, looking for a meal every single time, or was it just if you tap it on the tail a couple times and it takes it, it's good? Did you ever like read the snake and kind of go off that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I was more confident sending out an animal that was looking for food every time you opened up the tub. I'm more confident sending that animal out with maybe 10 or 12 meals, whereas a more passive eater that would still eat every week, but not quite as aggressively, I might want, 14 or 16 meals in it. And a lot of times people were making, payments too. They would send me a deposit, and then they would make payments. And so by the time they were finished making payments, I might have, 18 or 20 meals in the animal.
Yeah, I think it's more ideal. 20 to 22 meals is what most of mine are leaving.
Are they? Yeah. I got to tell you a funny story. So I sent this animal to a guy once in Philadelphia, and I mean, this snake was pounding food. There was no question. It was a well-established animal. So I sent it to him, and I didn't hear anything back from him, so I figured everything was good. I'd usually follow up with people, the following week. And, I don't remember, this has been too many years ago. I'm sure I followed up with him, and he probably said, yeah, everything's cool. So didn't hear anything more from him. And about 8 or 10 weeks later, he sends me an email, and he says, "The snake has never eaten for me." And I'm like, "Oh, you're kidding. You should have hit me up, sooner than this." And I would have
3 months later.
Right. And so I gave him some pointers. And one of the things that I used to find with people is people don't realize how aggressive that you have to be sometimes to get a chondro to snap at food. People expect for them to know that a pinky mouse is food, and they don't. You have to train them to eat pinky mice, and that chick scent goes a long way. But even with that, when you're establishing babies, I've had people that have had trouble feeding, and I'll be able to make it to their facility, and I'll tell them, "Well, show me what you're doing." And they'll like stick it up in front of the snake and maybe give it a couple of, and I'm like, "Oh, you got to be a lot more aggressive than that." And they're like, "Really?" And I'm like, "Yeah, watch this," and I'll go bang, 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 and the snake's like wraps it up, and they're like,
Yeah, you gotta beat the hell out of that damn thing.
I gave it,
Sometimes you got to. You don't got a choice.
Right. I gave this guy, several tips and pointers for, another month. And he just kept telling me every week, man, this thing won't eat. It won't eat. And so I was getting ready to come out that way and do a reptile show the following week. And I said, how about this? You know, after the show's over, I'm staying with my friend Phil Black. I said, you're about an hour from his house. You know, we'll take, you know, Sunday afternoon or Monday, and we'll come over and I'll see what I can do to help you. And he's like, oh man, that'd be great. So we get to his house, and it's, you know, I normally would feed in the early evenings, late afternoons, early evenings, turn the lights down low. You could still see, but, you know, semi-dark. But this was in the middle of afternoon, sunny day. He had the animal in like a breezeway area in between his, you know, kitchen and a family room. So it was very well lit, very bright. And I thought, well, I'll at least show him how to do it, even if the snake, you know, I can't get it to eat. So we thaw out a pinky. He had some chick scent, you know, I'd had him get. So open up the tub, and, you know, the snake's just sitting there, you know, coiled up on the perch. It doesn't respond, doesn't look at us or do anything. And so I grabbed the pinky and I put a little bit of chick scent on the head, and I start, you know, poking it. And he's like, oh man, that's a lot more aggressive than I've been doing.
He wasn't not trying to tap it.
I gave it 2 or 3 pokes, and that thing whipped around and grabbed that pinky and wrapped up. And that guy just looked at me in utter amazement, like, I can't believe. He goes, I said, no, don't be embarrassed. You know, everybody's got to learn. You know, I had to learn, but I that was the common thing I found over and over again, was people, you know, just were too gentle. And obviously don't want to hurt the snake, you know.
Yeah.
We're not talking about, you know, beating the snake with the food, but you've got to provoke them. And, you know, if they're just sitting on the perch ignoring you, you're not being aggressive enough.
True.
They're either going to snap and strike at it, or, you know, in the case of, you know, some of the diehards that are really hard to feed, they just drop off the perch and fall on the floor of the tub.
Run away.
Get the flying.
But if you're not getting some kind of response from them, then you're not being aggressive enough. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah,
Greg, have you ever woken them up with like the love pinch? I give mine a little love pinch with the feeding tongs until they take their head off and they get pissed off and they look, and I close it real quick. And then I'll get my.
No, I've never done that. I just use the head of the.
So you call it the what?
The love pinch. You just grab the tongs. You wait, because if they're sitting with their head there, you just give them a little pinch on their body. They wake up. They go like this. I close the tub real quick. I'll grab the fuzzy or the pinky, and I'll wipe it off real quick, and then I'll go back in, and it's already waiting, like ready, like pissed off, and it bites the first thing you put it in front of its mouth, and boom, they take it. Or
hey, whatever works.
I've even gone as far as I'll take the tongs closed, and I'll rub it down their body, and you kind of like play xylophone on the ribs, not really hard, but just that gets this one going fucking wild. He's so pissed when I do it, and there's no prey to him when I do it, so I put it back. So as soon as I open it, he's like, all right, motherfucker, who am I swinging at first? And as soon as I give it that pinky, boom, he wraps it up.
Yep.
Yeah, I remember them videos at the beginning, Chuck. You was like, I'm like, Chuck, get your snake mad.
A lot of them. No.
What'd you say? You was like, I don't want to.
No, a lot of them.
I don't want to have a bad feeder. I don't want to have them a bad something towards.
No, I didn't want to imprint. I think you could ruin them, and Tuck said it too. I think you could ruin them, but most of
man,
them.
This man just told you, man, you got to go in there and get them animals pissed off.
I got one that I have to be rough with. The others, what I'll do is, you wake them up with no pinky scent. First, they get pissed off because they're looking who pissed me off. So then I'll close it. I'll open it. I scent my pinky, or now they're fuzzies and they're not scented. But you just go, you do Rico's little thing. I use the perch as my brace and my tongs and go like this, do your little movements, and then just go by them. And once their tongue flickers, you go by them, let their tongue flicker, and then I hold it right there in front of their nose. I'll poke them real quick, and I'll poke the side of the body, poke the coil, poke the tail, poke the nose, and they usually take it. I personally have not had to beat the shit out of 7 out of 8. The other with the 8th one, he's special because it's my wife's snake. She named him, so I got to beat the shit out of it.
Yeah.
This is something you shouldn't say out loud.
No, I'm the victim. She beats me.
Nah, I remember them videos you was sending us. You was like, "Why is he not doing nothing?" You was like,
Well, I mean, they were also like the second feedings,
you was
but all
going
my
up in there
snakes.
like you was scared. You was like,
No,
No,
all
you
my
was.
snakes ate gentle.
You was.
All my
you
snakes
know
ate.
you was.
You
All
was
my
smooching
snakes
Neo.
ate with that. All my snakes ate with that technique. They really did. I didn't have. I personally did not have to jack most of them up. One or
I was
two.
talking about the videos at the beginning when you was telling us that these fuckers won't eat for me, and you were sending us a technique.
Yeah.
You remember
You
that?
was real soft.
just-
You was real soft. It
Well, yeah,
seemed
but
like when you was
it's
trying
the
to feed them,
same.
you had
But it's
James
the
Blunt
same. But
playing
it
in the
is the same
background.
technique that I used to get them. It was just the age. They
You're
were. It was this.
beautiful.
It
You're
was their
right.
first feedings.
You're
You're right.
beautiful. All right. I only got one more question, really. And my question that was a big part of me getting my first green tree
Yeah,
python
Pat.
was is breeding for you, which really at that point in time, like breeding wasn't a concern for me at all. But when you wrote that part and you talked about people's motivation as far as time and financial gain and things like that, what were you seeing that made you say, hey, from a person that's been doing this a lot longer, maybe I should present some wisdom to people just getting into the chondro hobby?
That's a good question.
Well, anytime you're working with a commodity that has the potential for serious income, serious financial return, you're always going to have people that are drawn to that because of the potential for financial return. And again, I don't have, I'm a capitalist. I don't have any problem with a successful business and profit and all that.
Sure.
But I would occasionally get an email from somebody that would say, okay, so if I buy, 8 males and 16 females and I produce X number of clutches a year and the babies are worth, this much, I should be able to, make, X number of
It does not work
It
like
don't
that.
fucking work like that, sir. No, sir. It don't work like that.
And so I more than I didn't want my company to be more helpful than corrective. I didn't want to come across like I was correcting people, but I just wanted to spare people the frustration and the disappointment, because
You gotta tell people the truth.
if you're setting out just to keep green tree pythons, let alone breed them, you're going to have some challenges and some disappointments. And especially when you start breeding, I know my buddy MJ out there in California. He just had his second year in a row of producing dead babies, dead baby green tree pythons. And he's like, man, what am I doing wrong? And you're not doing anything wrong. It happens. It just happens. If you're within the proper protocols of temperature and humidity for your eggs and everything, and it just happens. But I wanted to try to steer people in the direction of, look, do this because you love the animals, and if you make enough money to pay for your hobby, you're doing really well. If you actually show a profit beyond that, then you're doing great.
But
But
always be a hobby
because you love the animals. I'm doing ball pythons for investment income, but I love the animals. They're cool. There was a time when I didn't really like ball pythons that well, and I've really grown to appreciate them, and it's helped stretch my brain to learn all the genetics and all that stuff that goes with it.
There's a lot in them ball pythons too. It's like one every week.
Yeah, I'm
I'll
glad you
get
said
to
that,
Chuck's
Greg.
question
Just
later.
take a lot of the shame out of it. As far as like, you can do this to make money, but you can't do it just for making money, right? You can't, because they're so frustrating that you would just get rid of them and quit, right?
It'll forever be a
because
hobby.
they are disappointing, man. But
Always be a hobby.
it's cool. It's cool to love it, and then like be able to buy more of them with what you created, or go into the room and say, "I made you, you little stinker. I made you, you little stinker." I love it.
Right.
It's
It
cool
would be
as
a
shit.
hobby.
It's cool. It's cool to do something like you're doing in retirement. Love it, but also be good at it and benefit from it, you know, and
Right.
share it with your wife.
Right. Yeah, I when I started to grow my own green tree pythons, even before I'd sold any, my net worth started to increase just because I wasn't sending Trooper Walsh $5,000 every month. So
Yeah,
growing
that'll
is
do
a
it.
great milestone to reach.
Tuck is a guy named Tuck who has Etch-a-Sketch material for hair. He wants to know, what are you excited about producing with the ball pythons you currently work with?
What am I most excited about? Was that the question? Which ones am I excited about?
Yeah, what are you most excited about working with?
I've got some super mahogany and some black pastel mahogany animals that I'm real stoked to see what happens. And also, I just one of my favorite forms is ultramelpides. So I got a little group of ultramelpides, and my son Dan's also got a group of ultramelpides. So I'm real enthusiastic about those. They're just fabulous looking animals.
Are you going to try to swap some at Marshall, switch up the bloodlines a little bit?
Do what with Marshall?
Are you going to try to swap Marshall for some ultramelpides? Because I know he has a huge group that he's about to try to start breeding. He's got 12 females coming up, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah, possibly. Yeah.
Nice.
So, I do have another question. So, as far as green tree pythons, when you decided that you wanted to step away from it, did you miss it? Did you miss the idea of having to stay up late cleaning tubs and things like that?
Did you
you
get
miss
that
it at
itch?
all? And you
Get
want
that
to come
itch
back,
in the middle of the night?
come back into the game.
Not at first.
Right.
I had been maintaining a collection of live snakes most of my life. I had a big colubrid breeding colony before I got into green tree pythons, and so my wife and I were ready to have a little bit of freedom from constantly having to deal with live animals. It's hard to go on vacation. You're always, having to think about power outages in the back of your mind in the middle of winter, storm and everything. So
Always
you
behind
in the Midwest too, so them animals gonna freeze to death.
yeah. So it was actually a season of freedom that we really enjoyed, to step away from it for a few years. There were aspects of it that I missed for sure. But the longer it went, the more, I really missed it. And so
The first few months, did you find yourself going back in your room, still checking on animals that's not there, having withdrawals?
Yeah. I mostly what I did is I went through my old pictures, looked through pictures,
Okay.
and like, oh, man, I missed this animal, and I remember the day this animal hatched, and go back and look at the website archives, and it was just it was an extremely exciting time to be helping to take something that Trooper and a few other people had pioneered, and then I kind of helped take it to the next level. And it was very exciting and rewarding period of time. So when it's how I kind of got back into this was Tom Phillips and Phil Black. A couple of years ago said, "Hey, why don't you go to Tinley with us? We're going to Tinley." And I hadn't been to a reptile show in over 10 years. And so I'm like, "Yeah, I'll go." I said, "But not buying anything."
Yeah, right.
Okay.
So, yeah, we went to Tinley, and this was the October Tinley show
Yeah.
2 years ago, whatever, 2021. And honestly, you guys will probably go, oh, come on. But I didn't know if anybody would even remember me. And so I thought,
Come on, Greg.
and,
I sleep with your book, Greg.
as
Come
soon
on.
as I walked,
Wow.
Just
Come
soon as
on
I
now.
walked,
Come on, Chuck. Behave yourself.
man, Greg Maxwell's here. Greg Maxwell's here. And I was really gratified to realize how much name recognition I still had in the hobby. And Tom Phillips was doing ball pythons at that time. And so he's like, you ought to get some. And I'm like, man, I got nowhere to put anything. So I went back home from that show and started looking at what possible space I could convert into a little ball python area, and had that recording studio that's upstairs here, and talked to my daughter because my daughter and I had been, we've planned ever since she's been a teenager to do a CD of some of her music. And so I called her and I said, what are you thinking about, the CD and everything? And she goes, I've been dreading bringing this up to you because I don't want to hurt your feelings, but I had a recording studio offer to give me some studio time. And I'm like, you're not hurting my feelings. I said,
He's like, what? Where my ball pythons at?
I'm thinking about, getting rid of the studio. And she's like, don't feel bad, go for it. So that's kind of how I got back into it.
You had the rack. You said you had the racks. You had the racks on instant speed dial, huh?
Yeah, I bought my first ball python about 2 weeks after that show. Tom Phillips kept it for me at his house until my rack showed up, because back then, there was like a 12 or 14 week waiting period when you ordered the racks. I think there's still several weeks.
They're like 8 weeks now, usually.
Okay.
Some people, how you waiting for like a year and a half.
Yeah.
Wow. So yeah, got the first load of racks and set them up and started buying more, and here we are.
You said, what I was thinking, no, I think you can leave.
And now you're getting chondros at the facility.
Well, I agreed to get some of those babies started for Bill, and like I said, I really don't have any room at all for arboreal cages until I can convert this guitar shop into a reptile building, and I have to have income from the snakes in order to shut down the income from the guitars. So, because we're gonna need a little bit of retirement money even beyond our investments and stuff. So it's either guitars or snakes, and I'm like, man, I think it's gonna be snakes.
Yeah, I like it.
I guess my last question will be, I guess knowing what you know now, about the differences in localities. If you was to get back in, what localities would you be targeting?
I've always loved the Arus. They're just, a really beautiful form. I'd probably like to work with some of those. And then I had some of my most consistent designer success outcrossing Biak blood into other stuff. So I would probably try some of that. But really, for me, every chondro is beautiful in its own way. So, I'm not sure I'd be too picky.
You got any more? Adam Salad said guitars and snakes. Why not both? Because people don't have a lot of time all the time.
So he don't got all that space, Adam.
Yeah, mostly for me, it's a question of space.
He said he's squeezing racks, ball python racks upstairs.
Yeah,
Greg, we'll talk after this episode. Like I said, I have one from my most recent clutch. It's not something I would want to send out to just a keeper, but it's a 75% Aru, 25% Sarong.
Cool.
So,
well, Does anybody have any more questions? Y'all was so excited about asking questions, and then y'all didn't
Yeah,
ask
where the
questions.
questions at?
Everyone got
Yeah,
stage fright.
Was it right here?
I
Touch the
guess
right
so.
here? What's up,
So
Mikey Marks? What's up? Where you at with your questions that you always ask?
he asked a question earlier, I think.
Let me
Mikey
guess. Mikey
Marks,
Marsh
no.
asked, "How are you cycling your females?"
I think that's what he did ask. I think
I
he
think he
asked
asked, or he probably
that.
asked, "How do you pick holdbacks?"
That's an interesting question, though. That is a really interesting question.
I got a
So
question, Greg. Did you ever kept any? Had any experience at yellows? Did you produce a lot of yellows? Because I know the only locality pairing I think that you stated in the past was actually in a root pairing that you did.
That was the only like pure locality pairing that I did. Yeah, it was Arus, and the babies were all yellow. Something that I noticed, throughout my breeding career was certainly certain bloodlines are noted for producing, either yellow babies or red babies. But I noticed that kind of like blue eyes and brown eyes in people, if you had a parent that was a red baby and you bred that to another parent that was a red baby, you had much higher chances of getting a lot of red or all red babies in the clutch. Whereas if one parent was yellow and the other parent was red as neonates, that yellow really seems to be the more dominant color. So we kind of had to work to produce maroon babies, whereas the yellows just kind of came pretty easy.
Especially in the designer stuff. It seemed like the yellow designer stuff is more easily repeatable and it's really overpowering.
Yeah.
we got a question from Sir
I was
Pat.
about to ask that too, man.
I would like to
The
know
animal you're most proud of. I think I know what it is,
which
though.
which animal you produced is he most proud of? And then
I
we got
think that's Junior.
Yeah, I would have to say Calico Junior.
Yeah, I think so too. When you see that animal, especially as an adult, you're like, yeah, I did that.
That
Yeah, I did myself on that one.
Calico Junior is still the wallpaper on my laptop to this day.
Really, yes, yeah, I could tell. He got that look. He outdid his dad.
yeah. I mean, sometimes they do that. Got another question from Toss Salad. Who is Greg watching in the Chondro game right now?
I've got a handful of people that I follow on Instagram. That we've exchanged some messages back and forth. But I can't really honestly say I'm following any one person specifically. When I just scroll through my news feed, I obviously the Chondro pictures stick out to me, and I usually glance down to see who took the picture, who produced it. And I know there's quite a few people out there now that have some really nice animals, but I'm not really targeting any specific person or group at this point. I just appreciate all of them out there and the people that are keeping them.
Yeah. Ella Diablo was wrong.
That was a
Yeah.
spectacular animal. Unfortunately, I never could get her to breed successfully.
Yeah. I used to always look at that picture and be like, man, one day. One day.
When she started to go through her color change, I was like, holy cow. Yeah, just one blue scale after another.
But she wasn't the only crazy one in that clutch, though, right?
No.
There was multiple animals in there.
There were some real nice animals in that clutch. Yeah, that clutch was sired by an animal that I got from Trooper from his Maruk outcross clutch. So he outcrossed a locality Maruk with something, I forget what. And that's how Damon Salcius ended up hatching out an albino, was from an animal from that clutch. So there was het for albino floating around in that project for a while.
Yeah, those albinos came from a Pure Maroke pairing.
Yeah, partially. Yeah.
We got a question from Mikey Marsh as well that isn't the same. He worked on it. He said, once you had your established collection, how did you go about planning your yearling pairings and future pairings?
Well, what I would do every year is, I had a notebook, and the first thing that I would do was just take an assessment of all the animals health wise. If there were any animals that I had questions about their body weight, or if an animal had been treated previously that year for respiratory infection, I wouldn't breed it that year. So I would take an assessment of all the available animals that I had, and I would, of course, some of them were obvious. There were some pairings like I knew, this pairing is going to come up again. But a lot of times I would take, and on one side of the page in the notebook, I would write all the females. And on the other side of the page, I would write all the males. And sometimes I'd lay out the pedigrees, and the lineages. And then I would just say, okay, this pair makes sense because I'm trying to do this or that with it. And I would, draw a line from that male to that female. And I would just kind of, by process of elimination, come up with the pairs that I wanted to do. And if I had any males or females left over that didn't have specific pairings, then I would either use them as backups, or just sometimes just randomly pick a pair and just see, what would happen if I bred them together. And then, obviously as you do holdbacks every season, you're holding back animals within specific projects. So you have your blue line holdbacks, and you have your high yellow holdbacks, you have your calico line holdbacks, and you're always, at least I was thinking 2 or 3 seasons ahead. Eventually, what male do I want to put this female with? Or do I want to breed it back to a parent? Or do I want to try to outcross it to something completely unrelated? What do I want to do? And I don't know, that kind of stuff sort of came naturally to me. I didn't really agonize over it too much. Most of it, a lot of it was just kind of obvious. If you have a high blue project, obviously you're gonna try to strengthen that line and keep producing animals that are consistently turning blue. And same thing with high yellow or calico or melanistic, the mite phase melanistic lines, all that stuff. So you're always just trying to improve and strengthen, while at the same time controlling your inbreeding and keeping that, to a minimum. You have to do that sometimes in order to prove things out and get the results you need, but you always try to minimize it. And then when you do get a good result, you want to try to outcross it again so that you can maintain the genetic appearance in the offspring, but still introduce fresh blood.
Okay.
So that's kind of how I went about it.
When you bred the computer chondro to Aqua Girl, did you get any offspring that looked like Aqua Girl?
I don't remember. I think there were 5 in that first clutch that Calico Junior came out of.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't really remember.
Right. I asked you because they like siblings, and to get like somebody look like the computer chondro and the complete opposite, the Aqua Girl, kind of it's crazy.
Yeah.
Was wondering if anything like Aqua Girl popped out along the line.
I'm sure there were, but I don't specifically remember. I remember getting a lot of Aqua Girl type animals out of my female Joan Collins. And that's another funny story about a name. Probably you guys are familiar with the author Joan Collins. She was an author and an actress, and
And my grandmother used to read her books.
My female was just probably one of the nastiest chondros I've ever had. She would bite you every time. You had to really be careful going in that cage. And the human author, Joan Collins, her first novel was called The Bitch. And I thought,
I'm not surprised. Not surprised.
Joan Collins. So in Great Britain, there's a talk show hosted by a guy named Graham Norton. Any of you ever heard of the Graham Norton show?
No, I haven't.
I don't know if he's still on the air or not, but anyway, his PR people contacted me one year and they said, Joan Collins is going to come on the Graham Norton show. And we want to show her that there's a snake named after her. So they had me make a video and upload it to them. And it was a picture. It was a video of me holding the snake and, talking a little bit about the name and everything. And then they showed that live on the air to the actress Joan Collins on the Graham Norton show.
In Great Britain.
That's pretty cool.
Hey, did she try to bite you? She tried to tag you in the face?
No, not in that video.
Okay.
But yeah, you had to watch her. She was a biter.
We got a question from Snake Spirit. His question is, did you ever observe physical or behavioral traits being passed on through generations similar to color/pattern inheritance? And the second part of this is things like strong feeding response versus weak feeding response, birth size, adult size, etc.
I never tracked any of that stuff expressly. Like I didn't keep, detailed notes about it. But certainly there were certain bloodlines that tended to produce babies that were snappier than others. My Aru to Aru locality breeding, those babies were really passive.
Oh my God. I don't even talk about it.
Yeah, I had, it was a challenge getting those babies to eat just because you couldn't get them to snap. But in general, the Biak outcross stuff that I worked with was more aggressive than the PNG and Jayapura type stuff as a generality. And I never really had too much of a problem with feeding babies. On most clutches, I would get 80 or 90% of the babies eating without too much trouble. There was always a random baby in any given clutch that would just, drop and run as soon as you opened up the tub, and had a lot of trouble getting those animals to eat. But I never noticed any, consistent traits being passed from the parents to the offspring as far as feeding response. I was fortunate. I had pretty good feeding response from almost all of the bloodlines I worked with.
Okay. Pat had a comment. He said, Pie Guard tops Joel Collins is well represented in so many awesome blue pedigrees.
Yeah, 100%. It's in a lot of them. It's in a lot of them.
Yeah.
Both of those names.
So I don't know if we got any more questions though. No, Kiddo, you got anything else?
I don't know, man. I didn't blew my load, man.
What about you, Chuckster?
No, I just want to
didn't-
thank
I
you, Greg, for
didn't
coming
interrupt.
on. I really appreciate it. It's been an honor talking to you.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Graham. Thank you.
It's like talking to an idol. So
Nah,
we really
I'm just a
thank
guy
you.
like you guys that like snakes.
Yeah, but you wrote a book, and we were
Yeah,
raised
man.
on
Yeah,
your book.
but a little bit-
100
a little
babies
bit
a
cooler.
season. Multiple
You're kind of
times.
like us, but like a little bit cooler.
I don't even want to write a pamphlet, let alone a book.
I got more hair, but that's it. That's the only
Yeah.
but we certainly appreciate you, Greg. Thank you for coming through. I'm sure there's a lot of people in the comments that thank you for just coming on and just dropping off some wisdom and knowledge.
A
Well,
lot of knowledge,
guys,
man.
carrying the torch and keeping things going.
Well, thank you.
No,
You
it's a
got anything
privilege
else?
to do that. It's a privilege to have you on here.
Thank you.
Yes.
Man. More than you know.
Greg, you and my wife and me are gonna have a beer together in Tinley because I was gonna pull out of Tinley, go to Arlington, but I'm if you're going to Tinley, I'm definitely going. I'll go to Arlington next year.
Yeah, I'm absolutely planning on being there in October. I wasn't able to make it this last March. I had a pretty serious back issue over the winter, which I'm thankfully recovered from now. But yeah, March, I wasn't able to go to a reptile show and stand that long. But I'm definitely planning on being there in October.
Well, I'll be there. I know Keno will be there because he lives around the corner. Chuck said he's going,
Greg,
so,
get that back together, man. We want to see you out here.
Yeah.
So we will see you, and we will bother you in person.
Yes. And I apologize in advance for my wife's actions.
Listen, Jill's been so quiet. We haven't seen Jill. Leave Jill alone.
Scary. It's scary. It's yeah. Gotta let her out in the yard.
Hey, we can't wait to meet you either, Jeff. Jeff, you better come with a whole bunch of money in a Crown Royal bag straight from Canada.
He will.
Yeah, Greg, thanks so much for coming on, bro. I really appreciate it.
Taking the time to answer all our questions. Appreciate that, Greg.
But
this has been, y'all. This has been a great episode.
We behaved ourselves.
We did. Kind of.
We kind of behaved ourselves.
I appreciate it.
But we appreciate you, Greg. We're gonna let you. We're gonna let you go, and you have a good night. Thank you so much for coming on.
All right, guys. Thanks so much.
Can't wait to meet you in person.
Take care of that bag, man. See you in a few months.
All right.
See you in a couple of months.
All right, man. Cheers.
Good night.
All right,
y'all take care.
Till next week, y'all. Peace.
Peace.